Welcome back. We're going to continue with Phantom. The small ship that waited for us in Astrakhan Harbor was still flying the Imperial flag, and Eric's vanity was sufficiently mollified by the sight of it for him to be aboard the vessel without protest. I promised him privacy during the voyage. I would have promised the moon and the stars to get him safely out of the Caspian Sea, where I could be reasonably certain that he could not go trying to vanish on me again. The final stage of our journey was mercifully uneventful, and at the length we sighted the great length of sand hills that ran along the edge of the Mediterranean seacoast. Behind them lay the Merdabas, or dead waters, an endless succession of stagnant lagoons surrounded by dense jungle swamps and quicksand. Every manner of reptile wallowed in those stinking morasses, and clouds of mosquitoes hummed incessantly in the pestilential air. The maritime provinces were destined to unacclimatized Europeans, and once we had landed, I made the haste to the gentle air of Ashraf, where the sweet, familiar scent of cypress trees waited to embrace us. The little houses, with their sloping roofs, wide verandas, and stained glass windows, had never looked more beautiful, and though I knew we should press on inexorably to Tehran, where the court was in residence, Allah himself could not have commanded me to go to a step farther without a sight of my child. If I had hoped to impress Erik with the grandeur of my estate and my royal descent, I was quickly disappointed. I understand that princes outnumber the camels and fleas in Persia, he remarked with gravity. I felt myself flush. Allah, he had barely set foot in the country. How had he managed to unearth the most wretched of proverbs so soon? He studied my discomfort for a moment with quick amusement. Never mind, Daroga, he said softly. If I'm ever seized by the need to shed royal blood, at least I know where to find it. I sensed the smile behind the mask. In spite of my annoyance, I could not help laughing with him. You will learn to muzzle your tongue in court, I warned seriously. Merciless wit is a very dangerous possession. I shall try to remember that, and in the meantime, all mockery aside, I am truly honored to sleep beneath your royal roof tonight. I was moved by his genuine courtesy, astonished to see him shed his cold, abrasive manner, and assume, instead of the demeanor of a perfect house guest, charmingly civil and appreciative. The invitation to my home seemed to mean something deeply significant to him. If it were not for the mask, I could almost believe I was entertaining a young gentleman from the British mission. We sat together on the veranda in quiet civility, while my curious servants plied us with kaleens, coffee, and ices. It was there that my son stumbled upon us while his attendant hovered apologetically at a distance, expecting rebuke. Father, you've been away so long. I thought you were never ever coming back. I entwined myself in the urgent grasp that I had missed so much and set the boy back on his feet, steadying him when he seemed to lose his balance. Reza, I reproved gently, that's no way to conduct yourself in front of guests. Erik stood in silence as the child turned his vague, wondering glance at him. May your heart never grow narrow, sir, came respectfully enough. And then, with a sudden burst of excitement that no longer contained within the prescribed limitations of decorum. Oh, sir, are really the greatest magician in the whole world? Some have called me that. Erik's voice was surprisingly gentle. He took the child's outreached hand and turned it over to grasp so that it seemed for a moment as though he had studied the poem. Oh, please say we'll show you magic before you leave. Erik glanced briefly, questioningly toward me, and I gave him a sad, helpless shrug. I would be delighted to, he said kindly. And for you, Reza, there shall be something very special. something no human ear shall hear before, see, or shall hear again, not even the Shah himself. I saw the spellbound look on my son's face as he arose instinctively towards the source of extraordinary voice. "Oh, will you show me now, sir?" "Tomorrow," Erik demurred. "I'm afraid I'll have to wait till tomorrow. Can you be very patient, wait till then?" "Reza, you're forgetting your manners." Discomfited by the strange communication that I sensed between them, I spoke more sharply than I had intended. "Return to your quarters now, and I will come to you later." "Yes, father." I heard the hurt surprise in my child's voice as he permitted his attendant to lead him away. A tense silence descended on the veranda in his absence. Erik returned to the white wicker chair and examined the dregs of his coffee with odd intensity. "How long has the boy's sight been failing?" he demanded. It abruptly. "Perhaps 18 months. And the weakness of the muscles came later?" "Yes." I swallowed my own coffee with difficulty. "I am told it is a childish malady which will grow out in time." Erik sighed as he set the cup down on the table. "This is a progressive and degenerative sickness, Daroga." I stared at him. "Then you do not think he'll regain his sight after all?" "I do not think it is a thing you should hope for," he said evasively. "And now I have work to attend to. Perhaps you should be good enough to excuse me from supper tonight." I inclined my head and was left alone to brood upon his words. My servants told me that the lights burned in his room all night, and that when he eventually emerged from the apartment the next day, he was carrying a curious doll-like figure. Sometime later, I saw the figure for myself in Reza's quarters. It was not a doll, but an automaton, dressed in the robes of a Russian peasant, bearing a fiddler in one hand and a bow in the other. I had watched it bend stiffly from the waist and place a fiddle beneath its chin. I smiled involuntarily and waited for the simple gesture to be repeated. I had not seen such fluid refinement and clockwork mechanism before. "It's very clever," I started to say, but Reza clutched my arm gently. "Wait, father, it's not finished yet. Listen." When the figure began to play, swaying gently to the rhythm of its own melody, I was intrigued, but not yet dumbfounded. I told myself that I was listening to an intricate musical box, an ingenious but scarcely world-shattering invention. When the tune ended, Reza told me he had applauded. "It won't play again until we do," he insisted gravely. I hid a smile. "Erik," I thought with quiet amusement, "what an incorrigible showman you are." And I clapped politely to humor the child. When the figure did not move, I assumed its clockwork mechanism had run down. "You must clap with enthusiasm to satisfy the artist's insatiable vanity," said Reza severely. "That's what Erik told me." Puzzled, I put my hands together with great vigor. "Louder!" said Reza with a touch of impressionism in his voice that I had never heard before. "Louder, father!" The palms of my hands began to sting, but just as I was thinking, "I've had enough of this childish nonsense," the gypsy figure bowed with condescension, replacing the fiddle beneath its chin, began to play a different tune. 3 times I repeated the prescribed procedure, and each time the music was different. I thought I had recognized the same melody, but the sequence altered subtly on each occasion, so it was virtually impossible to determine what was the original phrase and which was the cunning variation. The more I struggled to pin the illusion down, the more confused and frustrated I became at my inability to govern my scattering senses. But there was at least one simple hoax I would expose. Erik had evidently built some kind of delay in the mechanism. All I had to do was wait, without applauding, and the cunning little device would betray itself by playing again. I was so determined to place the invention within the realm of my comprehension that I gave no thought to the needless disappointment I might have caused my son in revealing the secret of his trick. "Don't clap," I ordered suddenly. "Let's see what happens." We stood and waited in resounding silence. Without applause, the curious little automaton remained mutely aloof, and I fancied it was staring at me with some sort of maker attempt. "I told you it wouldn't work," said Reza suddenly. "I told you what Erik said." "I don't care what Erik said," I shouted, suddenly furious at the boy's slavish parroting of the name. "Give me the key, and I will wind it up again." "There is no key." "Don't be absurd, child. There must be a key." I watched up in the figure and began to examine it angrily, but it was just as you said. I could find no way of controlling the automaton. I was suddenly overwhelmed by a fierce, mindless urge to smash it against the wall of fury. "Stop shaking it," sobbed Reza. "You'll break it. Please, father, please give it back to me." Slowly I came to my senses and relinquished my maniacal grip upon my figure. Allah! What had come over me to make me act like a demented, petulant child? "Reza," I hurried across the room to the floor cushions where the boy had been crawling to take refuge with his precious toy. "Reza!" He turned his face away from me until the satin pillows shrugged off my hand. I was stunned by the unexpected rejection and appalled to realize how thoroughly I deserved it. I crept from the room in shame and leaned against the door, trying to regain my composure. For a moment I heard the child clapping frantically, and then those low, strangely maddening notes began to play all over again. Later that evening I found Erik sitting on the edge of the courtyard garden, lazily trailing his long fingers in the spray. I wanted to ask him how the automaton worked, but the memory of my intense irrational behavior that afternoon held me silent. Mosquitoes buzzed irrationally around as he accepted the bowl of the sherbet I offered. "Your wife has been dead for some time," he said unexpectedly. "Since it's not customary for those of your faith to confine themselves in a monogamous manner, I must assume you loved her very much." I looked up, outraged by the impertinence of this remark, and was silenced by the extraordinary compassion in the eyes behind the mask. His pitying glance took my breath away, as effective as a blow to the spleen. It filled me once more with a terrible sense of ill omen. I became aware that I started to tremble. "Does the child resemble her?" he persisted with sadness. "Yes." My voice was a thin, reedy whisper. Suddenly all I wanted to do was run from this. "I am very sorry," he said, and replacing the untouched sherbet on the wicker table, he disappeared through the full-length windows on the garden wall of the house. I sat very still, staring at the smooth, olive-skinned hand which lay limply on my lap. If the Shah's personal physician had told me my son was dying, I would refuse to believe him. I would have gone on clinging stubbornly to the last straws of hope like a drowning man. But I could not close my mind to the meaning of Erik's carefully veiled insinuation. I could not deny his mystical inner knowledge of things beyond my simple understanding. My son was dying, and the strange masked man, who killed without a qualm of conscience and seemingly untroubled by morality of any kind, was moved to generous pity for my plight. He was still ruthless, dangerous, and shockingly immoral, but I found that I could no longer thought of him as a cold, heartless monster. We lingered in Ashraf many days longer than had been my original intent, for I sunk in despair that no longer admitted to the urgency of the Shah's displeasure. What did it matter now whether I kept my post, my favor, my petty position in society? What did it matter anymore? Soon I would have lost everything that made life dear to me. My resentful bitterness resolving itself at length into the fierce need of a woman, I sent for the girl who had served me well in the past and lost myself eagerly in the soft buckling curves of her body. It meant nothing but in physical relief. A few moments of delirious pleasure and blessed forgetfulness that permitted me to function as the man Allah had created. I pitied any man who was denied the shaking of a simple, healthy need in the form of a wife, a concubine, even a prostitute. But when I thought of such a man, my mind instinctively shied away, unwilling to contemplate vicarious pain on behalf of another. I did not wish to think of what the face must inevitably have been denied to Erik, for now I have quite enough pain of my own. Reza spent those last few days almost entirely in the company of a magician whose voice and astonishing skills held by utterly mesmerized. For hours at a time he would sit at Erik's feet like a young addict in an opium den, begging shamelessly for another story, another song, and I marveled at the tireless good humor of a man scarcely noticeable for equanimity and patience. Sometimes he would teach the boy only a few simple tricks, guiding the child's hand with all the unseen skill of a clever puppeteer. "That's very good. That's much better, Reza. You may show your father now." Their voices drift past me, even through the distant chambers of my wretchedness, until I at last roused myself sufficiently from the stupor of inactivity to announce our departure. I was unprepared for the violence of Reza's reaction. Why must he go so soon? Why can't he stay a little longer? Reza, the Shah has commanded his presence short. You know that. But you don't have to go now, not straight away. The Shah! I hate the Shah! Shouted Reza passionately. I hate him. I have never seen my husband behave like this before, and I was alarmed by his outburst. Erik stood staring out the window with both arms crossed beneath his clip, and I sensed for once he was truly discomforted by what he had precipitated. I signaled to a hovering servant, and I told him to take the child to his apartments at once. But as soon as the man laid hold of his shoulder, Reza flung himself down on the floor and began to pummel the blue tiles in a frenzy of rage. My son, the quiet, well-behaved child, had without any warning become a savage, mindless little beast, and I was bitterly aware that I was going to be powerless to control him without resorting to significant physical force. "Reza!" The voice from the window below was immeasurably soft, hardly more than a whispered breath. Yet it made himself heard above the ugly noise of the child stood staring at. And immediately there was silence in the sunny, white-walled chamber. "Come to me," into the gentle, mellifluous tone that had crept an irresistible note of command. As I watched, Erik stretched out one hand and seemed to draw the child across the room to his side with a single gesture that pulsed with terrifying force. I became aware that I was holding my breath with some sort of dull horror. The same voice which was manipulating my child's mind was holding me in a frozen impotence that utterly denied all the power of intervention. I felt as though I had been drugged by a massive dose of poppy syrup. Reza was perfectly calm now, though the tears still stood gleaming on his flushed cheeks. "Will you come back?" he whispered tremulously. Erik placed one skeleton finger beneath the boy's chin and tilted his face upward to the light. "I will return as soon as my court duties permit, but if you cry when I leave, your father will forbid me to come here. You have behaved very badly in his presence. Go now and ask him for forgiveness." The child came to me like an automaton, with all the humility and deference that his master commanded, and I forgave him graciously in a mindless response to the superior, unspoken will. I felt that precise moment that Erik chose to release us from his current hold. It was like a cutting off some unseen electrical current. Even had I not already known for a ruthless murderer, I still stood have acknowledged him that day as the most dangerous man in the world. And that's it for that chapter. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.